It's good to talk about life and camp and highlights. It's great to have all you volunteers back. One thing about camp for our students a couple weeks ago is that Pastor Ashley was too humble to say that she went out and worked on the kitchen crew, which, by the way, I did last year, and that is no joke service. That is tough. And so I asked her what her highlight from camp was, and she said that she didn't die. And I say, that's actually legit, because I almost died last year, and you notice I wasn't back. So anyway, no, it's a great way to serve our students. It's good to be with you today. My name is Dave. If you're new with us, it's a great day to join us. We are starting a new series this morning, and as we get into it, I want to frame it up for us by talking about what this series is and what this series isn't. We are calling it Known, and the basic premise is this question: what should followers of Jesus be known for? And I think this is an important question because we're living in a society that seems to be increasingly unclear about this. All over the place, there are people who don't seem to understand what it biblically means to represent Christ to culture. And yet, Jesus is very clear about this subject. He says in the Sermon on the Mount, in the sermon about what it means to live for God and with God and under His rule and reign and authority in this world, He says, "If you follow me, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." That's sort of the capstone verse for this series. This verse where Jesus says, as my followers, as you walk through this world, be known by things that bring praise to God. Jesus seems to be saying here that there's something about walking with Him that should set us apart, make us different than the world around us. So what we'll do in this series is explore 4 biblical qualities we believe Christians should be known for as they represent Jesus in the world. And I will say this: our teaching team spent a good amount of time thinking about these. It's obviously not an exhaustive list, just 4 weeks, but we believe this list does challenge some of the tendencies we see in our world today, and specifically in American Christians. And we hope, what we say challenges some of your instincts, pushes back against some of your tendencies, some of your flesh, some of maybe what you're naturally inclined to do. In other words, if this series is not easy for you, then it's probably right. If it fits real nice and neatly and easily into your hip pocket and you just walk out of here like, that was a great one, Pastor Dave, on with my day, then maybe we missed the mark. But if you walk out thinking differently or approaching life from a different angle, then we hit the nail on the head. I also want to be very clear that this series is not about public image or reputation management. This is not a 4-week TED Talk seminar on how to get people to think better of us without the real internal transformation of us. That kind of approach Jesus flat out rejects. In fact, listen to what He says to the Pharisees, who in many ways were the masters of trying to manage their external religious reputation. Listen to what Jesus says to them. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean." Jesus says here, external presentation without internal transformation is worthless in the eyes of God. In other words, the goal of this series is inside out. It's to more and more become the people on the outside we want to be known for. I messed that up, didn't I? I did. Thank you. I caught it, though. It's to more and more become the people on the inside we want to be known for on the outside. And today, we are talking about being known for generosity. Now, I know when you hear the word generosity, your first inclination is to think about money. Some of you are already like, oh no, it's the dreaded money sermon. How did we come on this day? And today's message will briefly, slightly, barely include money as one of the areas of our lives to be generous with. But I actually want to challenge us beyond money. I'm calling this message generosity going beyond money. As Khalil Gibran says this, I love this quote, "You give but little when you give of your possessions. It is when you give of yourself that you truly give." That is our sermon in a quote today, and I love it. Why? Because it reminds me so much of Jesus. He, more than anyone in every way, was radically generous with his life. So I want us to consider this morning what it means to be people like him, people who are radically generous with our time, with our attention, with our affection, with our forgiveness and mercy and words and hospitality and empathy and service and our resources. You see, what if people, when they experienced us, walked away feeling like they got more from us, more than they anticipated, expected, or deserved? Because that's what it means to be generous. This is the dictionary definition: showing a readiness to give more of something than is strictly necessary or expected or deserved. A guy on the internet who I really like is named Ryan Leake. And Ryan talks about his time when he ordered some chicken tenders from an airport restaurant, and he forgot to ask for barbecue sauce. And so he got up from his seat and he walked back to the counter and he said, "Hey, can I get some barbecue sauce?" And the guy at the counter was really grumpy and he said, "That's 75 cents. And because Ryan didn't have any cash, he had to swipe his card again and sign his name on the little slip. But in that moment of encountering this angry, frustrated worker, Ryan decided to give him, for that 75-cent purchase, a $10 tip. And he explains it this way: God hasn't called me to match the energy, to return mediocre for mediocre. God has called me to be generous, to give more than is necessary, more than is expected, more than is deserved. One of our distinctives here at Cedar Mill Bible Church, one of the ways we sort of define our vision for the kind of people and community we want to be in the world, is we say we want to love extravagantly. Of all 7 distinctives, this one, I think, is the most convicting and challenging for me. It's the one that sort of pushes back most aggressively against my kind of internal human instincts. This is what we say about loving extravagantly. We love people when they least expect it and least deserve it. That's how we want to be known in the world. And again, friends, we are not talking about always giving an unreasonable tip. We're talking about living our lives with a posture, with a readiness to be generous whenever the Spirit calls us to. So let's start here. Why? Why are we often tempted to be ungenerous? Why is ungenerosity so appealing to you and me? Why are we tempted to be people who keep instead of give, people who protect instead of offer? Here's what Jesus says: you have the wrong master. You have given yourselves to the wrong master. No one, he says, can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon. In Jesus' day, mammon was the drive to gain wealth and prosperity for one's self. In our world, we call it materialism. And Jesus addresses this time and time and time again in the Gospels. Here's another example. Luke 12, he says, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed." In other words, greed can take a lot of different shapes and sizes. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. The word greed here describes a way of life where your number one priority is acquiring more for yourself. I have to get, I have to acquire, I have to keep and guard and protect what I have. When you continue on in this passage, Jesus tells a story about a rich guy who already has a ton, but his whole focus is more. How do I get and keep more? And here's the point. Jesus is telling you and me that there are very strong forces in this world pulling, tugging, and luring our hearts towards allegiance to the master of more. Anyone here serve the master of more? You see, here's the deal. Your life cannot be about seeking more and seeking the kingdom of heaven. They do not go together. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and a life philosophy that says acquiring more is what life is all about. Now, here's the question. Sitting here in church this morning, kind of sober-minded, thinking clearly, right, apart from worldly distractions, how many in here would say, you know, Pastor Dave, I've thought about it a little, and I think I'd like to serve mammon. I think I'd like to give my life to the allegiance of more. I'd like to follow the path of greed. I definitely want to make more the master of my life. Last week I talked about altar calls, how I'm like, not that comfortable with altar calls. But what if I did an altar call today and I was like, hey, some in here today are feeling the tug, you're feeling the call, so with every head bowed and every eye closed, if you want to give your life to greed today, just devote your heart to the pursuit of mammon, would you just throw a hand in the air and then just come forward, just come on down. You can kneel here at the altar and just pray, God, make me more greedy, right? Anyone in here want to, like, not too many takers today? No one wants to do that? No. So then why do we do it? Because more is sneaky. It doesn't present itself that obviously. It knows how to tempt you and how to trick you, how to lure you in slowly. Paul says it this way, writing to his young protege, Timothy. People who want to get rich, who want to make their lives about amassing more, fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. That word for trap was a noose that was used in the ancient world to catch birds, and they would never even see it coming. My son Dax was fishing this week at the Tualatin River. And he told me this story that he was sort of walking along the edge of the river, and he was wearing his Crocs, and he was kind of wading in on just the edge, and like up to his knees or maybe his thighs, and he could see where the bank kind of sloped down, but then it dropped off. And he was like, oh, I'm just kind of walking here. I'm not going to get too close to the drop-off. And he's just walking along, fishing and feeling good about it and just loving being out in nature and in the water and kind of catching fish. And then all of a sudden he stepped again, and his Crocs that don't have a lot of traction start to slide. Not real fast, not like a quick slip, but just a slow, steady slide down the bank towards the drop-off. And he just can't stop himself, so he's like paddling the water back, trying to give himself some leverage, and he can't do it. And just in time to see this whole thing, his buddy who was with him turned around and just watched as he slowly just slid off the bank and then into the water for a nice little swim amidst fishing. And nothing makes your high school friend happier than watching you fall into the river while you're fishing. That is like joy for a high school student. And don't worry, Dax can swim. He's okay. He's here this morning. He's all good. But he just got a little too close to the edge. You see, one problem with the shift from God allegiance to more allegiance is that it often happens so slowly that we don't see it coming. We think we're safe. We think we're just standing in the shallow water. But then suddenly we start to slide and we're plunged into ruin and destruction. So how do we get there? I mean, why do we even dabble with mammon devotion? Why do we even mess around with that stuff? Why are we walking in the shallow water of it anyway? Here's why. Because more promises happiness. Friends, this is the message of our world. Maybe more than any other message you get on every single platform you take in. If you get more, the message says, more stuff, more success, more attention, more good looking, more popular, more power, more pleasure, more important, you will be happy. Don't you want to be happy? Buy this, click this, watch this, do this. But time and time again, friends, Jesus challenges this. His picture of the blessed life never, not one time, includes hoarding or holding back from others. In fact, listen to how he talks about being generous with our forgiveness. This is from the Sermon on the Mount again. Forgive, and you will be forgiven, Jesus says. Give forgiveness, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. This is like when you order ice cream and they give you a nice, generous scoop. And you watch the dude like pack it in and press it down and pile it on. You're pumped when they do that, aren't you? Jesus says, when you forgive like that, when you forgive with that kind of generosity, it will lead to a happy, blessed life because it will come back to you. You will reap what you sow. Remember the story from Luke chapter 12? I was talking about it a minute ago where Jesus is speaking about the rich guy who wants more, all he wants is more. At the end of that story, Jesus says, God will call that man a fool. You fool, God says to him. Now, that's pretty strong language, right? That's biblical language, as Luis Palau used to say. You fool. Friends, sometimes we read the word fool and we think it's about people who just aren't very smart. That's actually not true. In the Bible, the word fool refers to someone who is out of touch with God's definition of reality, who's out of touch with God's understanding of how the world works, of how human beings function best. In this case, someone who thinks more will lead to happiness. That's foolish. Jesus says it won't work. And do you know who agrees with Jesus? Science. There is so much scientific research now on what the Bible has said for generations. That happiness is not something you get when you seek it. It's the byproduct of other things we pursue. In other words, if your goal in life is to be happy, you'll likely not be. But if your goal in life is to follow Jesus and advance God's kingdom and love others and serve others and bring justice and peace to the world, you're likely to find happiness as a result along the way. In their book, The Paradox of Generosity, Christian Smith and Hillary Davidson talk about this very thing, and they reveal that generous people are happier, healthier, they live longer, they have less depression and anxiety, they have better long-term relationships. The list goes on and on and on. Happiness, as it turns out, is the byproduct of a generous life. But here's the other reason we're tempted by more. Because more promises happiness, but here's the other thing it promises: security. And this is scratching the itch in the heart of some of you. So many verses on this. I'll just choose one or two here, I guess. Proverbs 18, 10 and 11. The name of the Lord is a fortified tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it a wall too high to scale. See, in the ancient world, to live behind walls, that was safety. That was where you found security. But in this case, Proverbs is saying, It's false security. Notice the word imagine. They imagine it a wall too high to scale. It's not. They think it is, but as it turns out, friends, here's the question. What do you imagine? What do you falsely believe will give you security in this world? What are you relying on and leaning on to feel safe and secure in this life? Because I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but your job can fail you. Your health will fail you. Your stuff, it can go away. Your wealth, it can disappear in an instant. In other words, gaining and keeping and protecting those things may make you feel safe and secure, but it's imagined security. It's temporal. Jesus, again, says this very thing, Matthew chapter 6. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Don't make your life about that, because moths and vermin destroy and thieves break in and steal. It can all go away. It may feel safe. It may feel secure, but it's temporal. It's not. It's shaky ground. So where do we find the solid ground? Where do we find the firm footings we need for life in this world? Jesus says, it's all about generosity. Generosity, according to Jesus, is where happiness and security and joy and fullness of life is found. It's the key. Listen again, Matthew chapter 6, he continues, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Doesn't that sound like a Lord of the Rings line? How great is, that's like Mordor, right? Anyway. Now, if you have your Bible with you, you'll notice, I also put it on the screens, there's a footnote next to the words healthy and unhealthy. These words are the key to understanding this passage. Healthy is actually the Greek word for generous. If your eyes are generous, it says, your body will be full of light. And unhealthy is the word in Greek for stingy. But if your eyes are stingy, your whole body will be full of darkness. Jesus is using a very common first century figure of speech here to say this. There are two different ways to approach and see the world. There are two very different and opposing realities you can let into your mind to drive your life. You can choose to see the world through A, the lens of generosity, or B, the lens of scarcity. You can have a generous eye or you can have a stingy eye. That's what he's saying here. Now, if you see the world through scarcity, if that's the eye that you look at life with, then resources will be limited. The world is overpopulated. The future is uncertain. So you had better get and grab and take all that you can, because at the end of the day, it's every person for themselves. If this is your view, you will be stingy. And you will naturally look out for number one. You will often be blind to the needs of others. And your focus will not be on what you have or what you can give, but instead on what you want and what you think you need. Friends, this seems to be the posture of too many Jesus followers in our world today. This seems to be the way they are seeing this world that we're living in. There's not enough to go around. I don't have enough. We should hoard and fight and protect. Why? Because we need more. And Jesus says, if you are seeing the world through that eye, if that's the lens lighting up your reality, then you are in a real dark place. But if your eyes are healthy, if you know that God is on your side and that he has endless resources, that he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, as the scriptures say, that he is the one who takes care of the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. If you see the world through the lens of God's gracious generosity, and because of that are always looking to give and bless and offer and provide, then your whole body will be full of light. Meaning this, you will be filled with goodness and truth and joy and holiness and freedom. Isn't that what you want your life filled with? Isn't that what your heart ultimately desires? How? How do we become these light-filled people of security building, happiness discovering, Jesus reflecting generosity? Because I'll tell you what won't work. Guilt. Guilt don't work. I'm not trying to guilt you today. I'll tell you what else won't work. Religion. Religion doesn't work. I'll tell you another thing. Moralism. Moralism doesn't work. Like, I'm just going to kind of like buckle down and be that kind of good person and do the right thing and determined to do it. Like, guilt and religion and moralism, they may work for a little while, but they will not sustain. John Ortberg tells this story of a guy who felt guilty because he cheated on his taxes. So finally, he wrote a letter to the IRS saying, I have not been able to sleep because last year when I filled out my tax return, I misrepresented my income. So enclosed is $500. If I still can't sleep, I'll send you the rest. That's funny. That's religion. Religion tells me how much I have to give so that I don't feel guilty. And not just money, how much time do I have to give? How nice do I have to be? What kind of forgiveness is required of me? Isn't that what the disciples asked Jesus? How many times, Jesus, do we have to forgive these people? And Jesus says, you're asking the wrong questions. In religion, generosity is something imposed on you, but the gospel, friends, the gospel of Jesus Christ transforms from within you. This is such a different message than the moralism of our world. You see, if you're here today and you don't find yourself with a consistent, growing desire to be more generous, then maybe the gospel needs to be revived in your soul. Maybe it needs to be fanned into flame again. I'll say it this way. Let's say you're in the grocery store. We'll make it Winco. And you went on a shopping trip and you are loaded up. Like the whole cart is packed. You're shopping for a few weeks of family groceries, Linda Herdina, and you are loaded to the gills, right? And you get to the checkout line, and you're there, and you start putting the groceries on that conveyor belt thing, you know, and finally they're all on the conveyor belt, and the checker's starting to check them, so now you shift gears, you go down to the end because you got to bag your own groceries at Winco. This is low-class, like, good working people stuff. So you're bagging your groceries and loaded in the cart, and then finally they're just coming at you, and the checker is done checking all your groceries, and so you leave the ones that are still on the belt and the ones in the bags and in your cart, and you go to pay, and just as you go to pay, you walk up and you realize, uh-oh, I forgot my debit card, because they don't take no credit card at Winco. I'm not sure what kind of organization this is, but they don't like a credit card in there. So you're like, oh no, I don't have my debit card. And you never have that much cash, just $10. You're like, oh, and the lady says that'll be $287.42. Like, you were loaded, right? And now you're panicking, that thing where your mind just starts to race, and you're looking for a solution, and you are not finding one, and the checker's looking annoyed, and the people are all lined up behind you, and they're getting angry. And then suddenly, a lady from the aisle behind you, who you barely know from your neighborhood, she comes walking quickly over, pulls her debit card out, swipes it, and says, I got you, no worries. What do you do in that moment? I'll tell you what you do. You go, no, 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 no. But in your heart, you're thinking, yes, 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 yes. But you're saying, no, 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 I can't let you do that. And which really means, thank you so much for doing that, right? I can't let you do that. And then you're like, oh, yeah, well, I'll pay you back. And the lady says, no, are you kidding? No, just consider it a gift. Like, no problem, we've all done it before. And she, like, walks away. So you go down, you're like, oh, wow, you finish up bagging up your groceries. You're a little embarrassed, but you're also just thankful you avoided tragedy. You bag them up, put them in the cart, and then you're wheeling out, And as you pass the pizza counter, you know the little counter where they sell the pizza in the back of Winco? As you pass the pizza counter, you overhear that a mom is $8.50 short on buying pizza for her 2 little girls. Now, in that moment, if you don't rip your wallet out of your pocket, pull that $10 bill out, and pay for those little girls' pizza with joy and glee and celebration in your heart, then you're just a bad person, right? Like you're just a horrible individual. By the way, that's just the modern version of the exact story Jesus tells in Matthew 18. And here's his point, it's the same as mine. If the amazing, astounding, radical generosity of God, saving you, redeeming you, loving you, and offering you life with him now and for all eternity does not change you on the inside, does not make you a person who longs to offer that love and grace and kindness in whatever ways you can to others, then maybe you missed it. Maybe you missed the good news. Maybe you missed how deep the Father's love is for us, how vast it is beyond all measure, that he gave his only Son that you might be his treasure. You see, if the gospel isn't making you radically generous, then maybe you're not spending enough time with the gospel. You're not soaking in his provision and blessing and forgiveness and encouragement and acceptance on a daily basis. You're not living with this fresh reality that Jesus came and swiped his card for your debt so that you could have salvation from sin and victory over death and the grave and a life with God of joy and peace and meaning and purpose and satisfaction forever. If you're not just brimming with generosity, then maybe you missed it. Friends, at the beginning of this message, I talked about Ryan Leake and like the extravagant tip he gave for some barbecue sauce. The question is really why? Why would someone do that? What was driving Ryan in that moment? Well, instead of telling you, I thought it'd be fun to let him tell you. Take a look at the screens.
The other day, I was at an airport eating some mediocre chicken tenders, and I went to this restaurant, and I had forgotten to get like some barbecue sauce, and I had already paid for my food. And I said, hey, could I get a side of barbecue sauce? And this waiter, he goes, it'll be 75 cents. I said, dude, really? So you want me to pull out my credit card, and you're going to swipe it, and you're going to give me 2 slips, one for the merchant, one for the customer, and then now I have to leave you a tip, right? And I could tell he was trying to make the point. And I said, okay, you make your point, I'll make mine. All right, so that's fine. So he gives me mediocre barbecue sauce with the mediocre chicken tenders, and then I left him a $10 tip. And then his attitude changed real fast. Now he's like trying to bring me premium chicken tenders. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, oh, these are in the back? Who are these for, you know? And the reason I did that isn't to just say I'm balling, because, I got $10. But the reason I did it is because I just wanted him to know, you don't get to ruin my day. No. I don't match the energy. I set the standard. I'm going to have a great day. Why? You don't deserve that kind of tip for barbecue sauce that is mediocre. But God hasn't called me to match mediocre for mediocre. God's called me to be generous. And so it's not about money. It's about carrying a heart that says, do you know what kind of person I am? I won the eternal jackpot. I got something that I did not deserve. And because I got something that I did not deserve, well, it makes me want to give away to people what they don't deserve.
Let me be clear in saying this. The message today is not, get out there and be more generous. Just do better, church. No, the message today is very clearly, remember the radical, generous gospel of Jesus. Receive it again. Invite it into your heart and life again, and continue to let it shape every single aspect of your existence. Because that's what it deserves. And that's what this meal is about. This meal that we're about to share together. It's this meal where Jesus says, Remember who I am and remember what I've done for you. Remember what I've freely given you, even though you do not deserve it. Remember the extravagance of my love. Remember the radical generosity of my grace. Think about it again and invite it into your life. Eat it, ingest it as if to saying, I need that power to live inside of me. I need that power, the power of that kind of goodness to push back the selfish inclinations that live and want to well up in my heart. That's the power I need for transformation. You see, this meal is a declaration against all the forces of evil and even the forces of hell that we belong to Him and He will define our lives. This is not just some religious symbol or moment that we do on the first or third Sundays. This is a chance for you to say, I long to be a person transformed by the gospel of Jesus. And He's still got work to do in me. And so today, I'll remember and I'll declare it again. Friends, just take a minute. Think about the gospel, how magnificent and majestic and enormous it is. And then when you're ready, come to the tables and grab the bread and the cup and bring it back to your seat and just hold on to it and just continue to let the reality of the gospel marinate in your life. And then we will receive the elements together in just a few moments. But take a minute. The tables are open whenever you're ready. Amen.